I never thought I'd be the one writing a post like this. My family wasn't perfect, but I never imagined they could betray me in a way that led to the death of my 2-year-old son, Tommy. It wasn't until I stumbled upon my dad's old phone that I learned the devastating truth, and now I can't unsee it. Growing up, I always knew my parents favored my older sister, Sarah. She was their golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She got piano lessons, dance classes, and brand new clothes from the mall. When I asked for the same, they said, "We can't afford 2 kids and extracurriculars, or you'll be fine with Sarah's hand-me-downs." It didn't stop there. At 16, Sarah got a brand new Honda Civic for her birthday, while I worked 2 years at McDonald's after school to afford a used Toyota that broke down after 6 months. When college came around, Sarah went to an expensive private university fully funded by my parents, including a semester abroad in Paris. I scraped my way through community college and transferred to a state university, working part-time jobs just to afford textbooks and bus fare. I always told myself it wasn't favoritism. My parents just showed their love differently. That lie kept me sane, even as the gap between how they treated Sarah and me grew wider. But all of that came crashing down after Tommy died. Tommy was born with a severe heart defect, and from the moment he arrived, my husband James and I knew we'd be in for a fight. His first surgery came the day after he was born. Insurance covered most of it, but we still had to pay $30,000 out of pocket. We drained our savings, took out loans, and worked ourselves to the bone. 6 months later, Tommy needed another surgery. We were already drowning in debt, so I went to my parents for help. I'll never forget the way they looked at me. "We'd love to help," my mom said, her voice dripping with pity, "but we're going through a tough time ourselves. Money's been tight." My dad nodded in agreement, saying they'd just had some unexpected expenses. I believed them. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. A month later, Tommy's condition worsened. He needed emergency surgery to save his life. A $50,000 procedure we couldn't afford. Again, I begged my parents, offering to sign a legal contract, pay them back with interest, even put up our house as collateral. They refused. 2 days later, Tommy passed away in the ICU, his tiny body unable to fight anymore. A month after the funeral, I was cleaning out Tommy's room when I found my dad's old phone under the bed. He must have dropped it during one of his rare visits. At first, I thought nothing of it, but curiosity got the better of me, and I turned it on. What I found shattered me. There were hundreds of messages between my parents and Sarah, messages that revealed a secret life I never knew about. Sarah had been married for 7 years to a man named Mark and had 3 children living in Florida. My parents had been supporting them financially for years. Every month, they sent Sarah $5,000 for her family's expenses. They paid $2,000 a month for her kids' private school tuition. They funded family vacations to places like Hawaii and Europe. Last year, they even bought Sarah a $400,000 summer home in the Hamptons. But the worst part? Just 5 days before they told me they couldn't help save Tommy, they sent Sarah $75,000 to put a down payment on a beach house. I sat there for hours scrolling through the messages. Photos of Sarah and her family lounging on a yacht, her kids in matching designer outfits, and my parents smiling proudly in the background. Messages about buying Christmas presents, iPads, gaming consoles, luxury items, while James and I were selling our belongings to pay for Tommy's medical bills. The realization hit me like a freight train. My parents had let their grandson die so they could fund Sarah's lavish lifestyle. I felt a rage I had never known before. My hands shook as I held the phone, scrolling through their deceit. I thought about all the times I defended them, told myself they loved us equally, told myself I was just imagining the favoritism. I couldn't let this go unanswered. My parents had to face the truth, and so did Sarah. I didn't know how, but I was going to make sure everyone knew what they'd done. The next family dinner was set for Sunday evening, and I arrived prepared for battle. These gatherings had been a staple of my parents' lives for years, a way to showcase their perfect family to the extended relatives. I had attended out of obligation in the past, but this time, I was there for revenge. For once, Sarah was present. Normally, she made excuses to skip these dinners, citing work or vague commitments. Seeing her perched on the couch, laughing with cousins, felt like fate handing me the perfect opportunity. She looked relaxed, completely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. After dessert, as everyone migrated to the living room for coffee, I stood up. My hands trembled, but I steadied myself with a deep breath. "I need to share something with all of you," I announced, my voice tight, but loud enough to silence the room. My dad glanced at me curiously, while my mom's face immediately clouded with concern. Sarah, oblivious, raised an eyebrow as if I were about to announce some boring news. I connected my dad's old phone to the TV using screen mirroring, and the first message appeared. A text from my dad to Sarah discussing the $75,000 wire transfer for her beach house. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I followed it with bank transfers, pictures of Sarah's hidden family, and threads detailing the private school tuition my parents had been paying for her kids. The real gut punch came when I displayed a text exchange from the week Tommy died. My mom had written to Sarah, "We'll send the money for the down payment tomorrow. Don't worry, we'll figure it out." That message was dated just 3 days before my parents told me they couldn't afford to help with Tommy's surgery. The silence exploded into chaos. "What the hell is this?" my Aunt Susan shouted, her face pale. "You told us you couldn't afford to help Jenny and James." My mom burst into tears and rushed toward me, her arms outstretched. "Please, let me explain," she wailed, as if crying could undo years of betrayal. I stepped back, shaking with anger. "Explain what? That you lied to me while my son was dying? That you chose Sarah's luxury over Tommy's life? Go ahead, Mom, explain that to everyone." My dad remained rooted to the couch, his head down, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Meanwhile, Sarah leaned back with a smug expression. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she snapped. "I have 3 kids to support. You don't know how hard it is?" "Hard?" I shouted. "You live in a mansion. Your kids go to private school and have iPads, while my son couldn't even get the surgery he needed to survive. Don't talk to me about hard." Some cousins began peppering my parents with angry questions. "How could you let Tommy die?" one asked. "You had the money to help." Others turned to Sarah, their voices rising with anger. "You've been lying to us all these years? Hiding your family and stealing from your own relatives?" The tension reached its peak when Sarah snapped. "This is my private life. You had no right to air it out like this." "Private?" I shot back, my voice shaking. "Tommy's death isn't private. It's a public tragedy because of your greed and their enabling." My mom sobbed harder, trying to reach me, but I recoiled from her touch. "You're not my family anymore," I said, my voice icy. "You killed my son with your choices. As far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me." With that, I walked out. Several relatives followed, their faces etched with shock and horror. Others stayed behind, torn between loyalty to my parents and anger over what they had done. For the first time in years, I felt something close to clarity. My parents had destroyed my trust and my son's chance at life. Now at least everyone knew the truth. The fallout from the family dinner was swift and brutal. Within days, the entire extended family knew about my parents' betrayal and Sarah's secret life. My phone buzzed nonstop as relatives called to express their shock, anger, or, in some cases, misguided attempts to mediate. Aunt Linda was among the first to call. "I can't get over that smirk," she said, her voice trembling with fury. She sat there like it was some kind of joke. How can someone be so heartless? Linda wasn't the only one furious. My cousin Emily reached out, and her anger was palpable. "Did you know Sarah told me you were always jealous of her?" she asked. "That you couldn't stand how much Mom and Dad trusted her." "Trusted her to do what? Steal? Lie?" I snapped, the words bitter on my tongue. Emily didn't hold back. When I called her out, she had the audacity to say, "Well, Jenny's just trying to ruin my life because she's miserable. She's playing the victim, as usual." But the most shocking revelations came from other family members who finally felt emboldened to share their grievances. One cousin revealed how Sarah had borrowed $10,000 last year, claiming her oldest child needed emergency surgery. It wasn't until months later that they found out Sarah had used the money to renovate her kitchen, complete with marble countertops and high-end appliances. Then Emily dropped the real bombshell. "Mark was my fiancé before Sarah," she said quietly. I froze. "What?" "8 years ago, we were engaged," Emily explained. 2 weeks before the wedding, he left me. I had no idea why, just a note saying he wasn't ready. Now I know. Sarah had been seeing him behind my back. Mom and Dad helped her hide it. They even attended her secret wedding 3 months later. The pieces started clicking into place, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. My parents hadn't just favored Sarah. They had actively participated in her lies, enabling her to destroy lives, including mine. By the end of the week, the narrative Sarah had tried to spin crumbled under the weight of her own actions. Every relative she contacted to play the victim turned on her, armed with years of their own frustrations and now the truth about Tommy's death. Despite their newfound outrage, I knew this wasn't enough. Words of support and shared anger wouldn't bring Tommy back. nor would they hold my parents and Sarah accountable for their actions. If I wanted real accountability, I need to take this beyond family drama. It was time to explore legal options. With James's unwavering support, I hired a lawyer to investigate my parents' finances. If they were willing to let Tommy die while financing Sarah's lavish lifestyle, I needed to know the full extent of their deceit. The lawyer moved quickly, uncovering layers of betrayal that left me breathless. The trust fund my parents had promised to set up for Tommy? It was a lie. They had diverted every penny into accounts for Sarah's kids. What should have been over $100,000 earmarked for my son's future had instead funded private school tuition, luxury vacations, and Sarah's endless list of whims. But that wasn't the worst of it. The investigation revealed that my dad had been stealing from his own company for years. He created fake insurance policies under non-existent clients, pocketing the premiums and funneling the money directly into Sarah's accounts. The total amount stolen? Over $200,000. Then there was my mom. She'd been embezzling from her high school's fundraising accounts, funds meant for students facing financial or medical hardships. She altered records to cover her tracks, siphoning money to help Sarah maintain her glamorous lifestyle. When my lawyer showed me the evidence, I felt like I was suffocating. My parents weren't just guilty of neglecting their grandson, they were criminals. I handed everything over to the authorities, determined to ensure they faced the consequences. The fallout came fast. My dad's company launched an internal investigation and terminated him on the spot. They filed criminal charges for fraud and theft, while my mom's school placed her on leave pending their own inquiry. She resigned before they could fire her, but the damage was done. But the darkest revelation came when the investigators stumbled upon adoption papers buried in old legal records. Sarah wasn't even my parents' biological daughter. They had adopted her when she was 2 years old, after my mom suffered a series of miscarriages. They had moved cities to hide the adoption from extended family, wanting to present Sarah as their miracle child. Not even Sarah knew. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Their extreme favoritism, their obsessive support of her, their willingness to sacrifice everything for her. It all stemmed from a misplaced sense of guilt and obligation. When I confronted them with this new information, their reactions were a mix of shock and desperation. My mom broke down, crying that she had failed as a mother and begging me not to tell Sarah the truth. My dad, on the other hand, was silent, his face a mask of shame. I left without saying a word, knowing that their carefully constructed lies were finally unraveling. But this was far from over. Their actions had cost my son his life, and I wasn't about to let them escape accountability. The truth about Sarah's adoption was like the final piece of a horrifying puzzle, one that explained so much but resolved nothing. When our lawyer handed me the adoption papers, I stared at them in disbelief. Sarah wasn't my biological sister. She had been adopted when she was 2 years old, shortly after my mom's fourth miscarriage. The timing aligned perfectly with my parents' sudden move to a new city, an event no one had questioned at the time. Not even Sarah knew. I couldn't shake the nagging thought. Had their favoritism been rooted in guilt, a desperate attempt to prove to themselves that adopting Sarah was the right choice? Or was she simply a scapegoat for their own selfishness, a way to hide their flaws behind their devotion to a fragile child? Either way, it didn't justify the years of neglect I endured or the unforgivable choice they made to let Tommy die, so Sarah could thrive. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. My parents had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep Sarah's life together. After she dropped out of college, they paid someone $155,000 to create fake transcripts showing she graduated with honors. They used my dad's connections to provide fraudulent job references, helping her land positions she wasn't qualified for. When Sarah's first marriage ended in chaos, they funded her legal battles and helped fabricate evidence to paint her ex as abusive. They didn't just enable her lies, they built her an entire world of deceit. But their sacrifices for Sarah came at a devastating cost to everyone else. It wasn't just Tommy. It was me, struggling through life while watching Sarah live in luxury. It was the family members they manipulated, the people they defrauded, and the lies they spun to protect her image. For days, I wrestled with what to do. Should I confront Sarah? Tell her the truth about her adoption? Or let her live in ignorance, blissfully unaware of the roots of her privilege? Ultimately, I decided she deserved to know. When I met Sarah at a local cafe, she was defensive from the start. "If you're here to whine about the family dinner, save it," she snapped. "You've done enough damage already." I slid the adoption papers across the table. "You might want to read these before you accuse me of anything else." Her smug expression faltered as she scanned the documents. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. It's the truth, I said, keeping my tone even. You're adopted, Sarah. Mom and Dad have been lying to you and everyone else your entire life. For a moment, she was silent, her eyes darting across the papers. Then she exploded. This is a lie. You're just trying to tear me down because you're jealous. It's not a lie, I said firmly. And it doesn't change what they've done, for you or to the rest of us. But maybe now you'll understand why they've always prioritized you over everything and everyone else. She stormed out, leaving the papers on the table. I didn't follow her. I'd given her the truth. What she chose to do with it was up to her. The fallout was immediate. Sarah called my parents, screaming about the adoption. They begged her to keep it quiet, but the damage was done. For once, Sarah wasn't in control of the narrative, and her carefully constructed world began to crumble. The moment I revealed the truth to Sarah, it was as though the foundation of her entire existence crumbled beneath her. When she first called me, it was to threaten legal action, another desperate attempt to control the narrative. But this time, I had something she couldn't twist. You were adopted, Sarah, I said, cutting through her tirade. Mom and Dad never told you because they wanted to protect you. Or at least, that's the excuse they used. There was silence on the line. Then a shaky, disbelieving laugh. What the hell are you talking about? I laid it all out. The adoption papers, the move to a new city, the lengths our parents went to in order to keep it a secret. At first, she dismissed it as another ploy. You'll say anything to make me look bad, she snapped. But when I sent her photos of the documents, her anger turned to panic. You're lying, she hissed. But her voice wavered. You had these made up. This isn't real. It's real, Sarah, I replied, keeping my tone steady. And whether you believe it or not doesn't change the fact that our parents have spent their entire lives protecting you while neglecting everyone else. Her response came later that night, in the form of a drunken voicemail. You've ruined my life, she slurred. Why would you do this to me? I had everything, and now I have nothing. Her bravado, the smirk she'd worn at the family dinner, the condescending tone she used to dismiss my accusations, was gone. What was left was raw desperation. The woman who had spent years manipulating everyone around her now sounded like a scared child. The next morning, she called again. This time, she begged. Please, you can't tell anyone else, she said through muffled sobs. If this gets out, my kids, Mark, everyone will hate me. It's already out, Sarah, I told her. Your lies, the fraud, the manipulation, it's all coming to light. And this is just the truth. You're going to have to face it eventually. Her tone shifted, veering between anger and pleading. You don't understand what this feels like, she cried. Everything I've built is falling apart because of you. No, I said firmly. Everything is falling apart because of you, Sarah. You did this, not me. The unraveling continued over the next few weeks. With the adoption secret exposed and the financial investigations closing in, Sarah found herself increasingly isolated. Mark, her husband, began asking questions about her past. Family members who had once supported her were now backing away, disgusted by the revelations. For the first time, Sarah couldn't talk her way out of the mess she'd created. And for the first time, I felt the faintest flicker of vindication, not for myself, but for Tommy. The truth was finally catching up to her. Sarah's meltdown marked the beginning of a full-scale collapse, not just for her, but for everyone who had enabled her. The fallout reached every corner of her carefully constructed life, unraveling decades of lies in a matter of weeks. Mark's decision to hire a private investigator proved to be the final nail in her coffin. The investigator dug deep, uncovering not only her history of fraud, but also a bombshell none of us saw coming. Sarah had a child before her first marriage. She had given up parental rights and hidden the truth from everyone, including our parents. When Mark learned about this, and the extent of her financial schemes, he didn't hesitate. He filed for divorce and sought full custody of their 3 kids. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Fraudulent documents, fake job histories, and the shocking abandonment of her first child. The judge ruled swiftly, granting Mark full custody and severely limiting Sarah's visitation rights to supervised visits only. Within a month, Mark packed up the kids and moved back to his hometown in Texas, cutting Sarah out of their lives entirely. My parents weren't spared either. My dad's company launched its own investigation after learning about the fake insurance policies he had created to fund Sarah's lifestyle. They found years of falsified records and embezzled client funds, amounting to over $200,000. He was terminated immediately and faced criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. My mom's disgrace followed soon after. The school where she worked uncovered discrepancies in their fundraising accounts, revealing that she had stolen thousands of dollars meant for student emergencies. Parents were outraged, demanding her resignation. Under mounting pressure, my mom was forced to retire early. The financial strain crushed them. With no steady income and mounting legal fees, my parents sold their house. The same house where I'd grown up and where we had celebrated countless family milestones. They moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment across town, a far cry from the comfortable life they had built. But even as their world crumbled, I found no solace in their downfall. None of this could bring Tommy back. The justice being served felt hollow, a pale substitute for the son I had lost. The most haunting moment came when Sarah called me from an unknown number, pleading for help. "Please," she sobbed. "I've lost everything, Mark, the kids, mom and dad, my reputation. I have nowhere to go." I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. Finally, I said, "You had a choice, Sarah. Over and over again, you chose yourself. Now, you're reaping what you sowed." I hung up and blocked the number. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of peace. Not because they were suffering, but because I was finally free of their toxic grasp. Their consequences were their own, and I was done carrying their burdens. The aftermath of my revelations created fractures within the family that seemed impossible to repair. What had started as anger over my parents' refusal to help Tommy turned into a flood of stories exposing decades of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. Emily's story hit the hardest. She came to my house one evening, her face pale with anger and hurt. "Did you know?" she asked, her voice trembling. "About Sarah and Mark?" I shook my head. "I only found out after everything came out." "I'm so sorry, Emily." She took a deep breath, clutching a stack of old letters. "These are from Mark. After he disappeared, I found this one hidden in a drawer." She handed me the final letter, a hastily scribbled apology. "I'm sorry, Emily. I can't go through with this. I'm not ready for marriage." Tears filled her eyes. Now I know the truth. Sarah wasn't just sleeping with him. She was plotting to steal him from me, and Mom and Dad helped her. They didn't just let this happen. They made it happen. Emily's heartbreak reopened old wounds for others. My Aunt Linda discovered that the $30,000 Sarah had borrowed for an emergency surgery had gone toward luxury home improvements. Sarah's kids had never been sick, and the so-called medical bills were fabricated with my parents' help. Another cousin revealed how Sarah had pressured her into a loan to cover private school tuition for her children. "I felt guilty saying no," she admitted. "And when I hesitated, your mom called me to vouch for Sarah, saying the kids' futures depended on it." These stories shattered what was left of my parents' credibility. Relatives who once admired their generosity now saw it for what it was: blind favoritism enabling Sarah's manipulative schemes. Family gatherings became war zones. Some relatives supported me, outraged by what my parents and Sarah had done. Others insisted that I had gone too far by exposing everything publicly. "Family should handle these things privately," my Uncle Bob said. "Privately?" I snapped. "That's what they've been doing for years, covering up lies and protecting Sarah while the rest of us suffered. I won't stay silent anymore." The divide widened further when Emily decided to take legal action. With my support, she sued Sarah for emotional distress, using the letters and testimony from family members to prove the harm Sarah had caused. The court battle dragged on for months, but Emily eventually won a settlement, including Sarah's beach house, which Emily sold to pay off her therapy bills. For many of us, this was the final straw. Sarah and my parents were effectively exiled from most family gatherings. My parents, once seen as pillars of the family, were now whispers of disgrace. The consequences of their actions were no longer confined to their own lives. They had torn apart the family they claimed to cherish. But even as the family divided, I began to feel a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and the burden of silence had lifted. For the first time, I could see the path to healing, not through reconciliation with my parents and Sarah, but through building a stronger, healthier connection with those who truly cared. The courtroom was packed. My parents sat at the defendant's table, looking nothing like the confident, doting figures they had once portrayed. My dad was gaunt, his shoulders slumped in resignation, while my mom clutched a tissue in her trembling hands. Across from them sat our lawyer, ready to present the evidence that would finally hold them accountable for their betrayal. The first order of business was Tommy's trust fund. My parents had promised to deposit $1,000 a month for each of their grandchildren. Yet when our lawyer revealed the account statements, the balance was glaringly empty. Instead, detailed financial records showed the money had been redirected to Sarah's children's accounts, funding private school tuition, vacations, and even Christmas gifts. When the judge demanded an explanation, my mom broke down in tears. "We didn't have a choice," she sobbed. Sarah said she'd take the kids away if we stopped supporting her. We didn't want to lose them. The courtroom was silent for a moment before the judge spoke, his tone cold and precise. "So, you prioritize your relationship with Sarah's children over the medical needs of your dying grandson?" My mom opened her mouth, but no words came out. The judge's ruling was swift. He ordered the remaining funds in Sarah's children's accounts to be seized and divided among the affected parties. The decision didn't bring Tommy back, but it ensured my parents couldn't continue their deceitful practices unchecked. Next came the case brought by my dad's company. The prosecution laid out a damning timeline of how my dad had embezzled over $400,000 by creating fake client accounts and pocketing the premiums. They presented forged documents, fraudulent transfers, and even a recorded confession from my dad's former secretary, who had been pressured into covering up the discrepancies. By the time the judge issued his ruling, full restitution to the company and a suspended sentence contingent on repayment, my dad looked completely broken. To avoid jail time, my parents were forced to sell their family home, their cars, and most of their possessions. They moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment, a far cry from the comfortable life they had once enjoyed. But the most shocking turn came during Sarah's own legal troubles. Mark's private investigator uncovered a series of fraudulent loans Sarah had taken out using her children's social security numbers. These loans, totaling tens of thousands of dollars, were used to fund her lifestyle after Mark cut off access to their joint accounts. When the charges were presented in court, Sarah's bravado vanished. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she accepted a plea deal, reduced jail time in exchange for giving up all parental rights to her children. Mark was awarded full custody, and Sarah was barred from contacting the kids without court approval. Watching it all unfold, I felt a hollow sense of vindication. Justice had been served, but the cost was immeasurable. My parents and Sarah had destroyed their own lives, and in the process, they had shattered the family they claimed to love. As I left the courtroom that day, James took my hand. "It's over," he said softly. I nodded, though a part of me knew the scars of their betrayal would linger for a long time. Still, for the first time since Tommy's death, I felt a glimmer of peace. We had faced the truth, and we had survived. 6 months later, James and I stood in our new home in Colorado, surrounded by moving boxes and the promise of a fresh start. After everything we had endured, this move felt like more than just a change of scenery. It was a chance to rebuild our lives on our own terms. James had landed a new engineering job with excellent benefits, and we were expecting our second child. This time, we told only a small circle of trusted family members, wanting to protect this new chapter from the shadows of the past. My parents and Sarah were no longer part of our lives. Occasionally, relatives would call, urging me to reconsider my stance. "They've lost everything," Uncle Bob said during one particularly heated call. "You don't need to keep punishing them." I cut him off before he could continue. "Tommy lost his life because of their choices," I said firmly. "This isn't punishment, it's boundaries. They don't deserve to be part of my life." Emily and Aunt Linda were our strongest allies. Emily had won her civil suit against Sarah, using the settlement money to buy the beach house that Sarah had once flaunted. "It's poetic justice," Emily said when she handed me the keys during a visit. "Now this house is going to create real memories, not ones built on lies." Sarah, on the other hand, had hit rock bottom. Her criminal record and destroyed reputation left her unemployable, and Mark's restraining order ensured she couldn't contact her children. She bounced between cheap motels, occasionally sending me desperate messages begging for help. I never replied. My parents weren't faring much better. They now lived in a cramped, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town, far removed from the comfortable home they had once taken for granted. My dad worked as a night security guard, a far cry from his days as a senior insurance agent, while my mom volunteered at a thrift store to fill her days. Their social circle had evaporated, with most friends and family distancing themselves after the full extent of their actions became public. But in the ashes of those broken relationships, I found something unexpected, a new kind of family. Emily, Aunt Linda, and a few cousins rallied around us, offering unconditional support. Jenny and Mike, two of my closest cousins, even moved to Colorado to help us settle in and prepare for the baby's arrival. Our new home was a sanctuary. I filled it with pictures of Tommy, making sure his memory lived in every room. A small photo of him sat on the mantel, framed by flowers from the garden James had planted in his honor. It was a bittersweet reminder of the past, but also a symbol of the love and resilience that had carried us through. One afternoon, during an ultrasound appointment, I held James's hand as we saw our baby on the screen for the first time. Tears filled my eyes, not just for the life growing inside me, but for the strength we had found as a family. "The future is ours now," James whispered, his voice steady. And he was right. We had been through hell, but we had survived. More importantly, we had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty, love, and the choices people make to stand by you when it matters most. Our journey wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. We were moving forward, stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the life we deserved.